Near midnight, rain covered Northbridge Airport while one worn suitcase moved beneath the customs lights. Inside were 6 declared training sensors, valid permits, and a phone number that could confirm everything in minutes. But the officer watching the scanner had already begun trusting his instincts more than the evidence. The quiet traveler answered every question, while her passport, phone, and documents slowly passed beyond her control. Then a young officer had to choose between protecting her career and preserving the truth. Only later did they open the credential that had been available from the very beginning. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about justice and conscience. The last international flight into Northbridge arrived 11 minutes before midnight, descending through a sheet of rain so dense that the runway lights appeared to float beneath the aircraft, like blurred embers under black water. The landing was rough enough to wake the passengers who had managed to sleep. Overhead compartments rattled. A child cried 2 rows behind Evelyn Hart. Somewhere near the rear of the cabin, a glass bottle rolled beneath a seat and struck a metal support with a hollow, repeating knock. When the aircraft finally slowed, no one applauded. The passengers simply reached for their phones, their coats, their patience. Evelyn remained seated. She was 56, though the long flight had added several temporary years to her face. Fine lines rested around her blue-gray eyes, and the pale skin beneath them carried the tired shadow of someone who had spent most of the previous day moving between conference rooms, security checkpoints, and narrow airplane seats. Her ash-brown hair, streaked naturally with silver, had been neat when she left Brussels. Now several strands had escaped near her left temple and rested against the collar of her gray trench coat. She did not fix them. Outside the oval window, rain raced diagonally across the glass. Ground crews moved under reflective jackets, blurred by water and distance. One worker guided the aircraft with orange batons that looked almost painfully bright in the darkness. Evelyn watched until the seatbelt sign went dark. Then she stood, reached into the overhead compartment, and pulled down a brown leather work bag. It was understated, well-made, and heavy with documents. She placed the strap over one shoulder and waited as the aisle filled with bodies. No one noticed her. That suited her. In the jet bridge, the air changed from recycled cabin warmth to the damp chill of the terminal. Evelyn walked slowly, not because she was uncertain of the way, but because her right knee had stiffened during the flight. Beside her rolled a medium-sized hard-shell suitcase in faded navy blue. Its corners were scratched white. One wheel clicked faintly every third rotation. A dark brown luggage strap circled the middle, and the leather cover around the telescoping handle had begun to peel away in a thin curl. The suitcase looked older than it was. It had belonged to Thomas. Her husband had bought it 17 years earlier before a trip to Montreal, insisting that the expensive ones were all hinges and vanity and that this one would survive anything worth traveling through. He had been mostly right. It had survived delayed flights, snowbound hotels, a railway strike in France, 2 lost baggage incidents, and Thomas himself. 3 years after his death, Evelyn still used it, not because she had no better luggage. There were 2 newer cases in the closet at home, both gifts, both lighter, quieter, and untouched. The old suitcase carried badly. Its handle pinched the base of her fingers. Its wheels caught on uneven flooring. But when Evelyn traveled with it, some small part of the journey still felt shared. At the entrance to immigration, the crowd stopped. 2 connecting flights had been canceled because of the storm, and passengers who should have been spread across several terminals were now compressed into one bright, exhausted mass. Announcements echoed overhead in calm, pre-recorded voices that no longer matched the mood of the terminal. A young couple argued beside a charging station. A businessman slept upright against his carry-on. 2 airport employees in high-visibility vests spoke quietly near a closed cafe, both staring at the storm through the glass. Evelyn moved with the crowd. She answered the immigration officer's questions, provided her passport, and accepted it back without incident. Her official position did not appear on the travel document, and she had not used the expedited channel available to senior federal officials. There was no reason to. She was returning from a public conference, not a classified mission. The samples in her suitcase were legal, documented, and commercially available. 6 compact environmental sensors, 1 training circuit board, 2 sealed binders containing non-classified technical specifications. The equipment would be used in a customs training program designed to teach officers how to distinguish harmless commercial electronics from restricted dual-use technology. Daniel Cho, the program's lead engineer, was waiting somewhere beyond the customs area to receive the cases and sign the transfer form. Everything had been arranged. At the declaration kiosk, Evelyn placed her passport on the scanner. The machine struggled to read it the first time. She tried again, holding the booklet flatter beneath the glass. A green light appeared. The screen asked whether she was carrying commercial goods, professional equipment, samples, controlled substances, agricultural products, or items intended for another person. Evelyn selected professional equipment. A second menu appeared. She entered the category, approximate value, country of origin, and purpose of import. The machine printed a narrow declaration slip with a barcode at the top. Evelyn folded nothing. She placed the slip inside the transparent front sleeve of her document folder, where the temporary import authorization and serial number list were already visible. The line moved forward. Above the inspection lanes, fluorescent lights reflected from the polished floor in long white bands. The terminal smelled of wet wool, airport coffee, cleaning solution, and the metallic cold of overworked ventilation. At a raised station beyond the lanes, Victor Kane was listening to Marcus Bell explain why numbers mattered. Marcus was the Deputy Operations Director for Northbridge Customs, a careful man in a Navy suit who rarely said anything in a way that could later be quoted against him. He stood beside Victor with one hand around his phone and the other resting against the edge of the counter. "The review board is looking at the last quarter," Marcus said. His voice was low enough that nearby officers could pretend not to hear. Victor's jaw tightened around a piece of peppermint gum. "We've been running clean traffic," he said. "I can't manufacture violations. No one asked you to." Marcus adjusted his rectangular glasses. It was the kind of movement he used when he wanted to soften the meaning of his next sentence. "But your secondary team is down 23% in actionable findings. That affects staffing projections, it affects overtime approvals. It affects how central office evaluates the value of this unit." Victor looked across the inspection floor. He was 47, broad through the shoulders, with a thick torso that pressed slightly against the front of his Navy uniform shirt. His nameplate, V. Kane, sat perfectly straight above his right pocket. 2 narrow silver bars marked him as shift supervisor. For years, Victor had been praised for noticing what other officers missed. The nervous traveler who over-explained, the family whose luggage weight did not match their declared purpose. The courier who kept touching the same jacket pocket every time an officer looked away. Victor had built a career on patterns. Lately, the patterns seemed less interested in revealing themselves. "You know my record," he said. Marcus gave a small nod. "I do." The answer should have reassured him. Instead, Victor heard the caution behind it. A record was something people mentioned when they were beginning to speak of the past. Marcus glanced at his watch. "I'm not telling you to chase numbers. I'm telling you the board wants confidence that Northbridge is not becoming passive." "Passive?" I said. "The board." Victor chewed once, slowly. The peppermint had lost most of its flavor. Marcus lowered his voice further. "You're up for a regional command recommendation next spring. This is not the quarter to look invisible." Then Marcus stepped away. He did not say find something. He did not need to. Victor remained at the station, watching the passengers approach. A family of 5 came through first, carrying too many duty-free bags. Then a university student with a cello case. Then an elderly man whose declaration form had been completed in handwriting so small that the receiving officer had to hold it beneath a desk lamp. Victor observed them all. His attention moved quickly, automatically, assembling and discarding possibilities. Too nervous, not nervous enough, over-prepared, under-prepared, traveling alone, traveling with people who answered for them. He had once trusted this process because it had been useful. Now he trusted it because too much of himself depended on it. Across the hall, Evelyn reached the baggage scanner. She placed the worn suitcase on the conveyor belt with both hands. The damaged handle folded awkwardly against the shell, and she had to press it flat before the belt carried the case into the machine. The operator watched the monitor. Evelyn stood beside the exit line, document folder in hand. Her face was calm. Not blank, not detached, simply composed in the way of someone who expected a system to perform the function it had been designed to perform. On the monitor, 6 compact rectangular objects appeared in close formation. Wires, circuit boards, metal housings. The operator leaned closer. Victor saw the change in the man's posture before he saw the image itself. He stepped down from the raised station. "What have you got?" The operator pointed. "Electronic modules. Dense housings. Repeated configuration." Victor studied the screen. The objects were not hidden. They were packed neatly in protective foam, each separated from the next. A flat board rested beneath them, wrapped in an anti-static sleeve. Documents filled the outer compartment. Nothing about the packing suggested haste. Nothing suggested concealment. Yet Victor's attention had already shifted from the objects to the woman waiting beside the conveyor. Gray coat, low brown shoes, old suitcase, no visible corporate escort, no expensive luggage. No anxious explanation offered before anyone asked. He watched her for several seconds. Evelyn met his eyes briefly, then looked toward the screen, waiting. That quietness irritated him. Travelers who carried unfamiliar electronics usually rushed to explain. They produced letters before being asked. They smiled too much or spoke too quickly. Evelyn did neither. She simply stood with one hand resting on the top edge of her document folder. Victor felt the first shape of a theory form. A professional courier would know not to look nervous. A person transporting equipment for someone else might carry perfect documents. A middle-aged traveler in plain clothing could be chosen precisely because she would seem harmless. None of these thoughts were evidence. Victor knew that. But they fit together with a smoothness that felt like recognition. He glanced back at the monitor. What did she declare? The receiving officer checked the kiosk record, professional equipment, training samples. Victor looked at Evelyn again. She did not shift her weight. She did not ask whether there was a problem. She waited. To Evelyn, Victor's inspection was still within the bounds of reasonable procedure. The modules could attract attention. They should attract attention. That was, in fact, part of the reason the training program existed. She had no objection to a closer look. What unsettled her was not that Victor studied the screen. It was that his gaze kept returning to her coat, her shoes, the age of the suitcase. He looked at the person carrying the documents more carefully than the documents themselves. Evelyn had seen that look in disciplinary reports. It rarely began with malice. More often, it began with a small private certainty. A story formed before the evidence arrived. Every fact that followed was forced to enter through the narrow door of that first conclusion. She felt the old weariness rise in her chest. Not fear. Recognition. Victor stepped toward the inspection lanes. His boots made a firm sound against the polished floor. He stopped beside the suitcase as it emerged from the scanner. "Mom," he said. His voice was controlled, professional, almost courteous. "I'm going to need you to come with us for additional screening." Evelyn looked at the secondary inspection area beyond him. Then she looked back at Victor. "All right," she said. Nothing in her tone challenged him. Nothing surrendered to him either. Victor heard something else: training, control, a rehearsed calm. He raised one hand and signaled to the officer at the secondary station. The gate opened. Evelyn took hold of the worn handle, felt the loose leather press against her palm, and rolled the suitcase toward the brighter lights beyond the line. Behind her, the ordinary stream of travelers closed again. Ahead, Victor Kane was already beginning to decide what kind of woman she was. He had not yet opened the folder in her hand. The secondary inspection station was separated from the main customs floor by waist-high partitions of frosted glass. It was not a threatening room, that was part of its design. The counters were pale laminate. The chairs were bolted neatly to the floor. Printed notices explained declaration, requirements in 6 languages, and a small blue placard reminded travelers that additional screening did not imply wrongdoing. Evelyn noticed the placard as Victor guided her toward the central table. She also noticed that he never looked at it. "Set the suitcase flat," he said. His tone remained professional, but the courtesy had narrowed. It now sounded procedural rather than human. Evelyn lifted the case onto the counter. The old wheel turned once in the air before becoming still. She pressed the recessed lock, opened both latches, and raised the lid without being asked twice. Gray packing foam filled the lower half of the suitcase. 6 compact sensor modules sat inside individual cutouts, each one marked with a white serial number label. Beneath them rested a circuit board sealed in a silver antistatic sleeve. Nothing was buried beneath clothing. Nothing had been wrapped to defeat inspection. Evelyn removed the transparent document folder from her work bag and placed it beside the suitcase. "Temporary import authorization," she said. "Commercial invoices, serial number manifest, transfer letter, and the receiving engineer's contact information." Victor did not reach for the folder. He leaned over the open case, his palms resting on the edge of the counter. The fabric across his shoulders tightened. What exactly are these environmental sensing modules used in cargo screening instruction? What do they sense? Temperature variation, pressure changes, airborne particulates, and radio frequency interference. They are commercial units. The internal memory has been removed. Victor's eyes moved over the foam compartments. Radio frequency interference. One of the training exercises involves identifying ordinary emissions from restricted signal equipment, so they interact with communication systems. They detect emissions. They do not transmit. Evelyn spoke without haste. Each answer was complete, neither defensive nor elaborate. Victor chewed once and looked toward the nearest workstation. Ortiz. A woman at the computer turned immediately. Lena Ortiz looked younger than her 29 years when surprised, though the effect disappeared when she focused. Her dark hair was secured in a low ponytail, and her uniform was so carefully arranged that even the silver nameplate above her pocket appeared measured into place. She crossed to the table with a digital tablet in one hand. Victor pointed at the open case. Log 6 unidentified electronic modules, possible dual-use classification pending verification. The phrase was reasonable. Evelyn knew that and said nothing. Dual-use technology covered ordinary equipment that might also serve military, surveillance, cryptographic, aerospace, or controlled industrial purposes. The category was broad by necessity. A preliminary description was not an accusation. Lena glanced at the labels. "Do we have the declaration code?" Evelyn slid the folder toward her. "The kiosk slip is in front. The authorization number is on the second page." Lena opened the folder. Victor's mouth tightened slightly. The movement was small, no more than a faint pull at one corner of his lips, but Evelyn saw it. Victor had expected to control when the documents entered the process. Her simple act of presenting them directly to Lena had altered the order he preferred. Lena scanned the first page. Her eyes moved quickly across the letterhead, stamps, and typed references. She turned to the manifest and compared the first 2 serial numbers with the labels inside the case. "They match," she said. Victor looked at her. "I didn't ask for a conclusion." Lena's fingers paused on the paper. "I'm only confirming the numbers." "Then confirm all of them." She did. The keys made soft, precise clicks as Lena entered the authorization code into the customs portal. A circular loading symbol appeared on the screen. Victor stood close enough to see the result before Evelyn could. The system returned a yellow status banner rather than the normal green clearance panel. Interagency record, limited local visibility below it, Smaller text stated that the issuing authority was valid, the authorization number was active, and full confirmation required contact with the listed program duty officer. Lena read it twice. The agency code validates, she said. Local access is restricted. It gives us a duty number for manual verification. Restricted by whom? The issuing program. That isn't what I asked. Lena's throat moved as she swallowed. The system doesn't display the office name at our access level. Victor leaned closer to the monitor. Evelyn watched his eyes stop at the line directing officers to call the duty number. The solution was visible, simple, recorded. Lena touched the telephone icon beside the number. I can verify now. No. Victor said it too quickly. The word came out before he had shaped a reason for it. Lena withdrew her hand from the screen. Victor straightened and tugged once at the lower edge of his uniform shirt. The fabric had begun to cling faintly beneath his arms. An active authorization code proves a record exists, he said. It does not prove these devices belong to that record. The serial numbers are listed, Lena replied carefully. Victor turned his head. The look he gave her was not openly angry. It was worse in its restraint, a supervisor's reminder that disagreement would be remembered. Documents can be altered. Evelyn looked from Victor to the screen. That is why the authorization includes a receiving officer and a verification number. I'm aware of how authorization works. Victor finally picked up the folder. He did not read from the beginning. He flipped first to the transfer letter, then backward to the commercial invoices, then to the manifest, as though disorder might reveal something that orderly review would not. Daniel Cho, he said. Who is he? The lead engineer for the training program. Government employee, contract technical director, contractor. Yes, paid by whom? The program is jointly funded. That wasn't my question. Evelyn's fingertips rested lightly against the edge of the suitcase. The direct contract is administered through the Treasury Department's training office. The procurement reference is printed beneath his name. Victor's jaw shifted. And you personally carried these units from Brussels? Yes. Why weren't they shipped through a bonded carrier? Because they are training samples, not restricted systems, and the workshop ended this afternoon. Hand transfer was approved as the faster and less expensive option. Approved by you? Approved by the program logistics officer. Name, Rachel Mendel. Title, Senior Logistic Administrator. Telephone, also listed in the authorization packet. Victor looked down. It was there. Evelyn had not contradicted herself once. Victor knew it. Lena knew it. The difficulty was no longer obtaining information. The difficulty was that every answer reduced the space in which Victor's suspicion could survive. A man entered from the adjacent lane, carrying a black government tablet against his chest. Calvin Rourke wore the same Navy uniform as Victor, though his had been pressed so sharply that the sleeves held faint creases from shoulder to cuff. His pale face was narrow, his brown hair fixed neatly to one side with gel. He glanced first at Victor, then at the suitcase, arranging his expression to match the seriousness he found in his supervisor. What did we get? Electronic equipment under a restricted view authorization, Victor said. Calvin gave a knowing half-smile. I've seen those before. Lena looked at him. You've seen this program? Not this exact program. The smile stayed. This kind of documentation. What kind? Calvin ignored the question. He moved beside Victor and peered into the case without touching anything. Professional couriers sometimes use valid agency templates, he said. They swap the manifest page or substitute the equipment after approval. Victor nodded slowly. The theory entered the room with the comfort of reinforcement. It did not matter that Calvin had not inspected the authorization number, the security marks, or the serial labels. What mattered was that another uniform had spoken the suspicion aloud. Evelyn watched Victor's posture change. His shoulders settled, his breathing slowed. Agreement had given him back the certainty the documents were taking away. Mr. Kane, Evelyn said, using the name on his badge. Is this currently an administrative customs examination? Victor's gaze lifted from the equipment. It is an additional screening. Am I free to leave the inspection area without the property? No. Am I being detained? You are required to remain while admissibility is determined. Under what classification is the property being held? Victor stared at her. The questions were not aggressive. That made them harder to dismiss. Evelyn continued. Is this a temporary examination hold, a seizure pending forfeiture review, or a referral for export control analysis? Calvin's smile faded slightly. Lena stopped typing. Victor's right thumb tapped once against the metal clip of his pen. It is being examined, he said. I understand what is physically happening. I am asking what authority is being exercised. I determined the scope of secondary inspection on this shift. That identifies the decision maker, not the legal status. A thin pulse appeared near Victor's temple. He looked at Evelyn's coat, then at her shoes, then at the ring on her left hand. His eyes moved as though seeking the source of her composure. What do you do for a living? I work in federal compliance oversight. The answer was accurate and intentionally unadorned. Victor's lip lifted by a fraction. Compliance. Yes, that explained the terminology. It explains why I prefer precise records. Victor closed the folder. The sound was soft but final. I'm going to need your passport and telephone. Evelyn looked at him steadily. For what purpose? Personal electronic devices are restricted during examination, and we need to retain your travel document until the merchandise determination is complete. Both requests could be lawful within the controlled inspection environment. The implementation mattered. Evelyn removed her phone from the inner pocket of her trench coat. She placed it on the counter, then opened her work bag and set down her passport beside it. Victor pulled a gray plastic property tray from beneath the desk. He placed the phone and passport inside, then added the entire document folder. Evelyn waited for him to retrieve the custody form. He did not. Lena glanced toward the printer. Do you want me to generate an interim property receipt? Victor did not turn. Not yet. Policy requires acknowledgement when original identity documents are moved out of the traveler's control. They're not being moved. They're staying at the station. Lena's mouth opened, then closed. Victor carried the tray to the far side of the counter and placed it beneath his workstation, out of Evelyn's reach and partly outside her view. The first true tremor passed through Evelyn's right hand. It began at the base of her thumb and traveled into her fingers. A brief involuntary vibration caused less by fear than by the sudden awareness that the record of what had been surrendered was not being created. She laid both hands flat on the suitcase foam until the movement stopped. Victor saw the gesture. He interpreted it as strain or guilt. Who is the supervisory officer responsible for this examination? Evelyn asked. I am. Who is the duty manager above you? Victor's eyes narrowed. Why? For the record. There is no record yet. That is precisely my concern. Calvin let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost a laugh. Victor turned toward the terminal and began writing on a paper inspection sheet. Evelyn watched the pen move. What property code are you assigning to the retained documents? Victor did not answer. What is the estimated verification period? Still nothing. Has the duty number listed on the authorization been contacted? Victor wrote another line. Lena's gaze dropped to the form. Evelyn could not see the entire page, but she saw enough. Under traveler conduct, Victor had written, unable to provide consistent explanation regarding purpose and control of equipment. For the first time, Evelyn felt anger rise above fatigue. Not hot anger, something colder, more exact. She had answered each question. Victor was not recording confusion, he was manufacturing it. Officer Kane, she said. The pen stopped. My explanations have been consistent. If you believe otherwise, identify the contradiction. Victor looked up slowly. His pale eyes held hers. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Victor pressed the pen harder against the paper and continued writing. The examination is ongoing, he said. You'll have the opportunity to clarify. Evelyn closed the suitcase lid with deliberate care. Her fingers shook once against the old leather handle. She tightened them until they became still. Across the counter, the duty telephone remained untouched. 37 minutes after the suitcase had been opened, the duty telephone still had not been used. The number remained visible on the authorization sheet beneath Victor Kane's left hand. He had shifted the page several times, stacked other forms over it, then uncovered it again whenever he needed to quote from the manifest. Yet the telephone beside the workstation had not moved. Evelyn had begun measuring the examination by smaller signs. The cooling cup of coffee near Calvin Rourke's tablet. The way Lena Ortiz checked the digital clock above the exit every few minutes. The increasing pressure of the airport ventilation, which made the papers at the edge of the counter tremble whenever the system changed cycles. The secondary inspection area had grown quieter as the international arrivals thinned. Beyond the frosted partitions, luggage wheels rolled toward the public concourse. Families reunited. Drivers lifted handwritten signs. Somewhere outside the controlled zone, Daniel Cho was likely still waiting. Victor completed another line on the working sheet and capped his silver pen. "We're moving this to an interview room." Evelyn looked at the gray tray beneath his workstation. Her passport, telephone, and original documents remained inside it without a custody receipt. "Has the status of the examination changed?" "No." "Then why is an interview room necessary?" "Because the inspection floor is not appropriate for an extended inquiry." The word extended was the first acknowledgement that time had become part of the issue. Lena straightened at her computer. "Supervisor, we're approaching the enhanced documentation threshold." Victor did not look at her. "I know the policy." The internal policy was not criminal law. It did not transform every delay into an unlawful detention, nor did it impose a rigid deadline that could never be extended. It required something simpler. When an administrative examination exceeded the normal processing period, or when original identity documents remained outside a traveler's control, the officer had to document the reason for continued restraint and maintain either a second employee in the room or uninterrupted monitored observation. The rule existed because administrative authority was broad at the border. Broad authority, Evelyn knew, required visible limits. Victor lifted the gray tray and handed it to Calvin. "Lock this in Station 3. Calvin accepted it without asking whether the property log had been created. Evelyn watched her documents disappear through a side door. A knot tightened below her ribs. It was not yet panic. Panic scattered thought. This sharpened it. She noted the time on the wall clock, 12:46 a.m. "Will the transfer of my property be entered now?" she asked. Victor gave her a thin, humorless smile. "You seem very concerned with paperwork. I am concerned with the legal custody of my identity documents. They are in government custody. That is a conclusion, not a record." The smile vanished. Victor pointed toward a narrow corridor behind the inspection stations. "Bring the suitcase." The administrative interview room was small enough that the table seemed to have been installed before the walls were finished. There were 3 molded chairs, a fixed desk, a ceiling camera inside a smoked plastic dome, and no exterior window. A printed notice near the door explained that interviews could be recorded for security and quality assurance. The room did not resemble a cell. The door had no bars. The furniture was clean. No one used the word arrest. Yet when Evelyn entered and heard the hydraulic hinge pull the door shut behind her, the legal distinction between examination and detention ceased to feel abstract. Lena followed, carrying her tablet and notebook. Victor took the chair opposite Evelyn, but did not invite her to sit. She lowered herself into the nearest seat anyway, placing both feet flat on the floor. Her suitcase remained beside her right leg. Victor opened a fresh interview form. "State your full name. You have my passport, for the record. Evelyn Margaret Hart. Current occupation, Federal Compliance Oversight. Employer, the United States Department of the Treasury." Victor's pen paused for less than a second. He continued. "Were you paid to transport the devices in your suitcase?" "No." "Were your expenses reimbursed?" "My travel was official." "So the government paid you to bring them here?" "The government funded my attendance at the conference." The equipment transfer was an approved administrative task. Victor leaned back. His duty belt creaked against the chair. "That sounds like compensation." "It is not compensation for carriage. There is no separate payment, fee, commission, or private benefit. Who owns the equipment? The training program retains custody. That isn't a legal entity. The contracting office is identified on the authorization. Who handed the devices to you? Daniel Cho's European technical counterpart, Dr. Elise Baumann. When? At 4:10 yesterday afternoon local time. Where? In the secure workshop room at the conference venue. Anyone witnessed the transfer? 3 people signed the chain of custody sheet. Victor flipped through the pages. There is no chain of custody sheet here. It is tabbed behind the serial number manifest. He found it. The muscle along his jaw tightened. Lena sat slightly behind Victor and to his left. She had stopped looking at Evelyn. Her eyes remained on the tablet, where each answer appeared beneath the questions Victor had selected. The answers aligned with the documents, every one of them. Victor knew this now with increasing certainty. That certainty did not make him calmer. It made him feel exposed. A less experienced officer might have mistaken his hardening tone for confidence. Evelyn heard the strain beneath it. His questions had begun to circle rather than advance. He was no longer testing the facts. He was testing whether repetition would make them change. Who will receive the units, he asked. Daniel Cho. Who pays him? The contractor identified in the transfer letter. Which is funded by the Joint Training Program, which includes your department. Yes, so you supervise him. No, but you can direct his work. Not contractually. Not contractually, Victor repeated, and the corner of his mouth lifted. The expression suggested he had located an inconsistency. He had not. Evelyn folded her hands loosely in her lap. Officer Kane, every answer I have given is supported by the documents already in your possession. If you are seeking a specific discrepancy, please identify it. I ask the questions in this room. Then ask questions that have not already been answered. Lena's fingers stopped above the tablet. Victor's face reddened first around the ears. It was a slow physical response, beginning as a faint bloom beneath the skin and spreading toward his neck. He did not raise his voice. Mrs. Hart, cooperation is not measured solely by whether you produce paper. It includes your willingness to answer clearly and directly. I have answered clearly and directly. That is your characterization. It is also the recordings, assuming the system is functioning. Victor looked toward the dark camera dome. For the first time since they entered, he seemed conscious of it. He stood. I need to consult the duty manager. He left the room without taking the interview form. The door closed behind him. Lena exhaled so quietly that it was nearly soundless. Evelyn turned her head slightly. Has the continuation authorization been documented? Lena's eyes rose to meet hers. For a moment, Evelyn saw the conflict there without disguise. Lena knew the policy. She knew what Victor had omitted. She also knew he controlled her final evaluation. It's being reviewed, Lena said. By whom? Deputy Director Bell. Has he been provided the authorization number and the duty contact? Lena's right hand trembled once around the stylus. She tightened her grip. I'm not the reporting officer. That was not my question. The young officer's lips pressed together. Before she could answer, Victor's voice became faintly audible through the door. He was speaking on his phone in the corridor. Marcus, I've got a traveler with electronic modules under documentation we can't authenticate locally. A pause. No, she's answering, but she's evasive about control and compensation. Evelyn looked at Lena. Lena's face had gone still. Victor continued outside. The papers reference a restricted interagency program, but the system won't validate the contents. I don't want to release potentially controlled technology based on a phone number printed on the same packet. He did not say the issuing agency code had validated. He did not say the serial numbers matched. He did not say the system itself had generated the contact number. He did not say Evelyn had declared the equipment before screening. His omissions were technically clean. Each sentence contained some fragment of truth. Together they created a false picture. Evelyn had spent much of her career examining exactly that kind of language. The most durable misrepresentations rarely depended on direct lies. They depended on architecture. carefully chosen absences that forced the listener toward a conclusion the full record would not support. Victor returned several minutes later. His expression had settled into professional firmness. Deputy Director Bell has authorized continuation of the examination pending specialist review. On what factual summary? Evelyn asked. Victor ignored the question. He looked at Lena. I need to cover issues involving interagency protocols. Step outside. Lena glanced at the policy notice beside the door. Sir, because the interview has exceeded the standard processing period, either a second officer has to remain or the room must stay under continuous monitored observation. The camera is active. Lena looked toward the ceiling. We haven't confirmed the monitoring station. Victor's nostrils flared. I'm confirming it now. The policy requires confirmation before the witness leaves. His eyes narrowed. The room became very still. Victor moved one step closer to her, not enough to be overtly threatening, but enough to change the balance of space. Your annual competency review is still open, Ortiz. Lena's face lost a measure of color. Victor spoke almost gently. I would think carefully before suggesting your shift supervisor does not understand basic interview policy. The threat was not written. It did not need to be. Lena's mother's medical appointments, the probationary status, the permanent appointment. Victor had not yet signed. None of those facts were spoken in the room. Yet they seemed to gather around her shoulders. Her lower lip trembled once before she drew it inward. Yes, sir. She stood. Evelyn felt anger rise through her with such precision that it almost cleared the fatigue from her body. Victor had not merely disregarded a safeguard. He had converted Lena's dependence into an instrument. Officer Ortiz, Evelyn said. Lena stopped near the door. Victor turned sharply. Evelyn kept her eyes on Lena. Please note the time you were instructed to leave. Victor's hand came down flat on the table. The impact was not violent, but the sound cracked through the small room. You do not direct my staff. No, Evelyn said, but she remains responsible for the accuracy of her own record. Lena's breath caught. Then she looked at the clock. 12:58 a.m., she said quietly. Victor stared at her. Lena opened the door and stepped out. For one brief second, before it shut, Evelyn saw shame and fear competing across the young woman's face. Then she was gone. Victor pressed the wall intercom. Systems, this is Kane at interview 3. A voice answered through light static. Systems desk. I need the camera feed moved to restricted access. Interagency material may be discussed. Who's authorizing the restriction? I am. There was a pause. Supervisor Kane. Access changes require a written security basis and approving manager. Victor's shoulders rose with a slow breath. Log it as an oral emergency instruction. Documents may involve controlled technical information. The voice on the other end belonged to Owen Park, though Evelyn did not yet know his name. In the monitoring room 2 corridors away, Owen sat before 6 displays beneath the cold glow of server indicators. He was 34, narrow-shouldered and tired-eyed behind round black glasses. Conflict made him physically uncomfortable. Victor's voice over the intercom caused his left knee to begin bouncing beneath the desk, but systems had rules even when people did not. I can move the stream to the secure server, Owen said. I cannot disable retention or remove it from the audit log. I didn't ask you to disable it. You asked for restricted access. I asked you to secure sensitive material. Owen's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Understood. I'm documenting the oral instruction under your account and timestamp. Victor's cheek twitched. Just do it. The connection ended. On Owen's screen, interview 3 shifted from the general monitoring panel to the secure archive channel. The camera continued recording. Owen entered a note. Access restriction requested verbally by Supervisor V. Kane. No written authorization supplied at time of request. Retention preserved. He saved the log twice. Back in the interview room, a small green indicator remained lit beneath the camera dome. Victor sat down again. For a few seconds, he said nothing. The silence had changed. Without Lena present, the procedural room felt less administrative and more personal. Evelyn studied Victor's hands. The right one rested beside the interview form. The left remained closed around the cap of his pen. His knuckles had whitened. "You understand," he said at last, "that trained couriers often present exactly as you do." Evelyn felt the temptation to end it. She could state her full title. She could demand that he contact the Office of Inspector General. She could make the room change instantly. The thought brought no satisfaction. If she revealed herself now, Victor might stop because she outranked him, not because the evidence required it. Marcus might call it a communication failure. Lena's removal might become a harmless staffing choice. The false notes might be corrected before they hardened into an official record. Worse, the entire incident could be reduced to the accidental inconvenience of an important woman. Evelyn looked at the empty chair where Lena had been sitting. "No," she said, "I understand that you have decided my composure requires explanation." Victor's pen cap cracked faintly under the pressure of his fingers. He loosened his grip. "You're being held pending verification." It was the first time he used the word held. Evelyn heard it settle between them, not arrested, not charged, but no longer merely waiting beside an open suitcase. She placed both palms flat on the table and felt the cool laminate steady her pulse. "Then document the basis," she said. Victor opened the interview form again. This time, before asking another question, he wrote the conclusion he intended the answers to support. Outside interview 3, Lena Ortiz stood with one hand pressed against the edge of the system's desk. The corridor was colder than the interview room. Air moved steadily from a ceiling vent, lifting the loose hairs near her temple and carrying the faint electrical smell of printers, carpet adhesive, and overheated monitors. On the wall beside her, the digital clock read 1:07 a.m. 9 minutes had passed since Victor forced her out. She could still feel the pressure of his warning. "Your annual competency review is still open." He had spoken quietly, almost helpfully. That was what made it worse. An open threat could be reported. A threat disguised as professional guidance lived in the space between words, where the person with less power was expected to understand and remain silent. Lena looked through the narrow window in the interview room door. Victor sat across from Evelyn Hart, his back partly blocking the camera's view of the table. Evelyn remained upright, both hands visible, her face composed beneath the cold overhead light. The older woman did not look frightened. Lena wondered whether that made the situation safer or more dangerous. She returned to the nearest terminal and reopened the authorization record. The same yellow banner appeared. Interagency record. Limited local visibility. The issuing code remained valid. The temporary import authorization remained active. The system still displayed the same instruction. Manual verification required. Contact Program Duty Officer. The number glowed beneath the message. Lena read the policy note attached to the record. It did not say supervisory approval was required before calling. It said the examining officer or assigned verifier should contact the listed authority when local access was insufficient. She looked toward interview 3 again. Then she lifted the telephone receiver. Her fingers were damp against the plastic. The first ring lasted long enough for her to imagine Victor opening the door. The second ended with a click. Cargo Security Training Program, Duty Line. The man's voice was alert despite the hour. "This is Officer Lena Ortiz with Northbridge Customs," she said. "I'm calling to verify temporary import authorization NBT 7714. A pause followed, filled with keyboard sounds. "My name is Daniel Cho. I'm the technical director listed on the authorization." Lena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Daniel's voice was precise and slightly impatient. The voice of someone who had already spent too long waiting for a problem that should have been routine. "I'm at the public arrivals area," he continued. "The courier was due almost an hour ago. Can you identify the traveler?" Evelyn Hart. Lena's pulse quickened. "And the equipment?" 6 environmental sensor modules, commercial model ES44. 1 training circuit board in an antistatic sleeve. All internal memory removed. Lena opened the serial number manifest on her screen. "I need you to confirm the serials." Daniel read them one at a time. Each number matched, the first, the second. By the fourth, Lena's grip on the receiver had loosened. By the sixth, the entire basis for continued suspicion had narrowed to almost nothing. "I can send a signed confirmation from the program office," Daniel said. "Give me a secure address." Lena reached for a notepad. The door behind her opened. Victor stepped into the corridor. He did not ask who was on the line. He looked at the authorization screen, then at the receiver in Lena's hand, and understood immediately. His expression did not explode. It contracted. The muscles around his mouth tightened until one corner lifted in a small, disbelieving sneer. "End the call." Lena's hand froze above the notepad. Daniel was still speaking.
"Officer Ortiz?"
Victor came closer. "I said end it." Lena looked at him. "Daniel Cho has confirmed the traveler, the quantity, the equipment model, and all 6 serial numbers. He is preparing written." Victor pressed the disconnect button on the telephone base. The line went dead. For a second, Lena continued, holding the receiver to her ear. A faint electronic tone repeated against her skin. Victor removed the receiver from her hand and returned it to the cradle. "You contacted an external party during an active examination without authorization. The system instructed us to contact him. The system provided a number. It did not authorize you to disclose an active inspection. I only gave the authorization code. You confirmed a traveler was being examined. He already knew she was carrying the equipment." Victor's nostrils widened, a pulse beat visibly above the collar of his uniform. "You are not the lead officer." "No, sir." "You do not determine whether a phone call constitutes verification." "No, sir." The words came automatically, but Lena's posture had changed. Her shoulders remained tight, yet she no longer lowered her eyes. Victor noticed. "Open your incident notes." Lena hesitated. Now, she accessed the working record. The original entries appeared with timestamps beside them. 0019. Traveler voluntarily presented temporary import authorization before case opening. 0022. Traveler requested manual verification through program duty contact. 0031. Authorizations code active. Local access restricted. Victor read the lines. His jaw shifted slowly from side to side. Revise the second entry. Lena's fingers rested above the keyboard. Traveler disputed examination procedure and requested outside contact. That isn't what happened. Victor looked at her with the controlled patience of a teacher correcting a difficult child. She challenged the process repeatedly. She asked us to follow the verification instruction. She argued about the order of the examination. She asked why we had not called. Victor leaned closer. "Right, Traveler contested the examination procedure and requested external intervention." Lena felt a tremor begin in her right forearm. She placed both hands on the desk so he would not see it. Victor pointed at the first entry. "Remove before case opening." The documents were presented before the suitcase was fully opened. That level of sequence is not operationally relevant. It establishes voluntary disclosure. It clutters the report. He moved to the third line. Add that the authorization contents could not be independently authenticated. The issuing code was authenticated. The contents were not. Daniel could confirm them. An unidentified voice on an external line repeated information printed on the same packet. He identified himself as the listed technical director. You did not verify his credentials. He offered written confirmation, and you ended the call before receiving it. The sentence struck Lena with such force that her mouth parted. Victor had disconnected the call himself. Now he was shaping the interruption into evidence of incompleteness. She looked at him, searching for some trace that he understood what he was doing. She found it, not in guilt, in fear. The skin beneath Victor's eyes had tightened. A fine sheen of sweat covered his upper lip. His right thumb rubbed repeatedly over the edge of his nameplate, an unconscious attempt to reassure himself that the authority represented there still belonged to him. Calvin Rourke appeared at the far end of the corridor. He had been watching long enough to understand the balance of the conversation. "Everything all right?" he asked. Victor did not look away from Lena. Officer Ortiz is having difficulty distinguishing raw notes from formal report language. Calvin approached with his tablet tucked against his chest, his expression softened into professional sympathy. Lena, raw notes are always messy. The supervisor is asking you to make the sequence legally clear. It is already clear. Calvin glanced at Victor before answering. Clear facts can still be phrased poorly. He drew Lena several steps away, lowering his voice. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. He wants me to remove when she presented the permit. He wants you to write in operational language. He wants the record to imply she resisted verification. Calvin's lips pressed into a narrow smile. No one is asking you to lie. He disconnected the verification call. Because chain of authentication matters, the serials matched. Then write that the serials were verbally repeated by an unverified caller. Lena stared at him. Calvin sighed. You're in your final probationary quarter. Victor signs the recommendation. You know that. My review should have nothing to do with this. In a perfect office, maybe. He shifted the tablet beneath his arm. Write in the supervisor's language. Preserve your personal notes separately if it makes you feel better. That was how a false record was born, Lena realized. Not through one dramatic order, through softened verbs, deleted timing, passive sentences. A subordinate was not told to invent an event. She was told that sequence was irrelevant, that precision was clutter, that doubt sounded more professional than confirmation. By the time the report was finished, every sentence might be technically defensible. Together, they would still be a lie. From inside interview 3 came Evelyn's voice. It was calm but louder than before. You may continue questioning me, Officer Kane, but you may not characterize my request for verification as interference. Victor turned toward the door. Evelyn had heard enough through the imperfect seal to understand what was happening outside. The interview room door opened, and she appeared in the threshold. Victor had apparently moved her chair closer to the table, but she was standing now. Her gray trench coat remained buttoned, and the exhaustion in her face had deepened into something more severe. You were instructed to remain seated, Victor said. I was not informed that standing violated any lawful condition of the examination. This conversation does not concern you. It concerns the accuracy of the record being created about me. Victor's head angled slightly. You're interfering with a personnel discussion. I am identifying a material misstatement while it is being made. His face flushed. You have no authority over my staff. No, Evelyn said. That is why your use of authority over them matters. Lena felt the words land. For one dangerous moment, Evelyn considered saying more. She could see the tremor in Lena's hands. She could see Calvin standing near enough to Victor to borrow protection from him. She could see that the young officer's livelihood had been placed directly against the truth. Evelyn's official identification was only a few rooms away. One title could stop this. One title could also poison Lena's choice forever. If Lena resisted only after learning the detained traveler had power, Victor would later say she had been intimidated by rank. Marcus could call her conduct politically motivated. Calvin could describe her as opportunistic. Evelyn forced herself to remain silent about who she was. The decision felt less principled than it had minutes earlier. It felt cruel. Victor pointed back into the room. Return to your seat. Before Evelyn could answer, movement beyond the controlled zone barrier drew Calvin's attention. An older man stood in the public corridor with the burgundy cloth suitcase beside him and a large phone raised chest high. Harold Finch had been speaking with his daughter on video while waiting for a shuttle delayed by the rain. He was 63, thin through the shoulders, with a white beard trimmed close to his chin and a tweed cap folded in one hand. The camera had not been aimed deliberately at customs. It had captured the corridor because Harold had been showing his daughter how empty the terminal had become. Victor's voice had carried across the open space earlier. I knew there was something wrong the moment I saw that suitcase. Harold's daughter had heard it too. Dad, she had said through the phone, don't hang up. Now Harold remained in place, uncertain whether to leave or keep recording. Victor saw the phone. Sir, he called, recording is prohibited in the inspection area. Harold looked behind himself. I'm outside the line. Put the phone away. Harold lowered it slightly. I'm on a call. Calvin moved toward the barrier. Security can assist. Victor's control was returning through action. He stepped into the corridor and pointed toward a uniformed airport security officer near the concourse entrance. Have him delete the recording. Harold's face tightened. Delete it? You recorded a controlled customs operation. I was calling my daughter. Then you have no reason to retain customs audio. The security officer approached but slowed, visibly uncertain. Airport security could enforce location rules and direct someone to stop filming. Ordering deletion of personal data was another matter. Evelyn moved to the doorway again. Officer Kane. Victor turned. You may direct him to stop recording where restrictions lawfully apply, Evelyn said. You may preserve the device as evidence under proper authority if an offense has occurred. You may not compel deletion of existing personal data from a public area without a documented legal basis. Victor's mouth twisted. You are now advising a bystander to obstruct security. I am asking you to state the authority for destruction of potential evidence. The word evidence changed the air. Harold tightened his grip on the phone. The security officer stepped back half a pace. Calvin stopped smiling. Victor looked from Evelyn to Harold, then to Lena's open notes on the screen. For the first time, the situation no longer seemed contained within one administrative room. There were witnesses now, records. A caller who had verified the equipment, a technician preserving camera logs, a traveler who understood the difference between restriction and destruction. Victor felt the corridor narrowing around him. He pointed at Evelyn, back inside, then at Lena. Make the revisions. Lena looked at the screen. Her mother's medical bills passed through her mind with terrible clarity. The permanent appointment, the health insurance. The review Victor could delay with one sentence about insubordination. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then she closed the report without saving any changes. No, sir. Victor's face became still. What did you say? I will add that the call did not produce written confirmation before it ended. I will not remove the time she presented the authorization. I will not write that she argued when she requested the verification required by the system. Calvin whispered her name as a warning. Victor took one step toward her. Lena's knees felt weak. Her hands were shaking openly now, but she did not move away. You are refusing a lawful supervisory instruction. I am refusing to alter factual notes. The silence that followed seemed to press against her eardrums. Victor's expression changed from anger to something more wounded. Betrayal. He had expected fear to produce obedience. Instead, it had produced a boundary. Leave the terminal, he said. You are relieved pending review. You cannot remove the reporting witness while the examination remains active without assigning a replacement and preserving her notes, Evelyn said. Victor snapped toward her. Stop interfering. Lena used the moment. She lifted her tablet, turned away from Victor, and entered a short internal code into the secure staff portal. The Integrity Hotline form opened. Her thumb shook so violently that she mistyped the access number once. She corrected it. Under immediate concern, Lena wrote, Supervisor prevented required manual verification, pressured reporting officer to alter sequence and characterization of traveler conduct, sought deletion of bystander recording, and threatened probationary review. Original notes preserved. She attached the timestamps. Then she pressed submit. The confirmation screen appeared without sound. Lena lowered the tablet. Victor was still arguing with Evelyn and had not seen, but somewhere beyond the terminal, in an office that did not answer to him, the record had begun. By 1:54 a.m., the examination had lasted long enough to require another decision. The decision did not belong to Victor Kane alone. He could continue a routine secondary inspection within the limits of his shift authority. He could preserve questionable property while a specialist reviewed it. He could request supervisory approval for an extended administrative hold. What he could not do was convert uncertainty into overnight detention simply because the morning shift might offer him more time. That required a documented referral, a receiving unit, a stated legal basis, and someone above him willing to accept responsibility for the transition. Victor stood at the counter outside interview 3, with the referral form open on his tablet. The fields were pale blue and unforgiving. Basis for escalation, unresolved material discrepancy. Reason lesser investigative measures were insufficient. The screen waited. Victor's right hand had gone cold. He flexed his fingers, then pressed them against the side of his uniform trousers as if friction might restore circulation. The air conditioning had not changed, but a chill had settled beneath his shirt and along his spine. Behind him, Calvin Rourke pretended to review the inventory sheet. Lena Ortiz stood farther away near the systems terminal, her own tablet held against her abdomen. She had not been formally removed from the building. Victor had ordered her relieved pending review, but the active examination still lacked a replacement reporting officer, and the integrity submission she had filed had generated an automatic preservation notice on her notes. The system would no longer allow them to be deleted or overwritten. Victor did not yet know that. He knew only that Lena had stopped obeying him. Inside the interview room, Evelyn Hart sat alone beneath the camera. Her suitcase remained beside the chair. Her phone, passport, and document packet were still secured elsewhere. The removal of those objects had created a strange absence around her, as though the ordinary proof of her identity had been detached from her body and placed under someone else's control. She had stopped checking the wall clock. Time had become less useful than sequence, the valid declaration, the ignored duty number, the interrupted verification, the altered characterization, the removal of Lena, the attempt to control the recording. Each act was now part of a chain. Evelyn had spent years teaching investigators that misconduct rarely announced itself as a single dramatic decision. It accumulated through small acts of convenience until the person responsible could no longer retreat without admitting the entire structure had been built wrong. Victor entered the room. His posture was still upright, but the performance required more effort now. His shoulders seemed fixed in place rather than naturally squared. The skin around his mouth had tightened, and a shallow vertical line had appeared between his eyebrows. "Deputy Director Bell is coming down," he said. Evelyn studied him. "For what purpose?" "To review whether the matter should be referred to the morning investigative unit." "On what suspected violation?" "That determination is under review." "Which offense is being considered?" Victor's jaw moved. "Potential misrepresentation of controlled or dual-use equipment." "Have you identified any false statement?" "You have provided incomplete confirmation of your professional status." "My employment is not the legal basis for the admissibility of the equipment. It affects the credibility of your explanation." "The permit, manifest, and serial numbers determine whether the equipment matches the authorization." Victor's lips thinned. "You continue to dictate the scope of the examination." "No. I continue to distinguish between a material fact and a convenient one." He looked away first. Outside the room, the corridor door opened. Marcus Bell arrived without his overcoat, carrying his phone and a slim leather folio. His navy suit had been carefully tailored, but the late hour had begun to expose its limits. The knot of his wine-colored tie sat lower than before. His white shirt had creased across the stomach, and his glasses slid down his nose when he looked toward the cluster of officers. Marcus did not appear angry. He appeared inconvenienced. That distinction mattered. A furious superior might ask what had happened. An inconvenienced one usually began by asking how visible it had become. "Victor," he said, "walk me through it." Victor stepped out of the interview room and closed the door behind him. "We have a traveler carrying electronic sensor modules and a training board under an interagency authorization with restricted local visibility." Marcus glanced toward the suitcase through the door window. "Declared?" Victor hesitated for a fraction of a second. She entered professional equipment on the kiosk. "So yes, but the documentation could not be fully authenticated." Lena's eyes lifted. Victor continued before she could speak. "The traveler has been evasive regarding operational control, compensation, and chain of custody." There was an external call, but the caller's identity was not independently established. Marcus looked at Calvin. Calvin gave a restrained nod. "The paperwork is sophisticated," he said, "but there are unresolved authentication issues." Marcus opened the folio. "Where are the originals?" Victor gestured toward the locked station. Calvin retrieved the gray tray and placed it on the counter. The passport lay on top. Beneath it sat Evelyn's phone and the transparent document folder. Marcus flipped through the commercial invoices first. "These don't look irregular. They may be genuine documents attached to substituted equipment," Victor said. "The serials, verbally matched by an outside caller." Lena spoke. "They also matched the manifest before the call." Victor turned. Marcus' gaze shifted between them. "Officer Ortiz, I understood you were relieved from the examination. She remains the original reporting witness," Evelyn said from inside the interview room. Her voice carried through the door. Victor opened it sharply. "You were not asked to participate in this discussion." Marcus looked into the room for the first time. Evelyn sat with her hands resting on the table. Her expression was tired but steady, and the stillness in her gaze made Marcus pause longer than he intended. "Mrs. Hart," he said, adopting the careful tone of an administrator entering a problem already mishandled, "I'm Deputy Director Marcus Bell. I'm reviewing the basis for the continued examination. Then please review the complete record. That is my intention. Begin with the property receipt." Marcus glanced toward Victor. Victor's throat moved. "We have not generated a formal receipt because the items remained within the inspection complex." Marcus removed his glasses and cleaned one lens with the edge of his tie. It gave him several seconds not to react. "And the duty verification? Not completed through a verified written channel." Lena stepped closer to the counter. "The system instructed us to call Daniel Cho." "I did. He confirmed Evelyn Hart, all 6 devices, the model, and every serial number. He offered to send written confirmation." Supervisor Kane terminated the call. Marcus stopped cleaning the lens. Victor's face darkened. "She contacted an external party without lead officer authorization. The system designated the number as the verification channel," Lena said. Marcus put his glasses back on. His attention settled on Victor with a new, unwelcome caution. Why was the call terminated? Because the caller had not authenticated himself. Did you allow him to authenticate himself? He was repeating information contained in the packet. Lena's hands began to shake again, but her voice did not. He identified himself as the listed technical director and offered secure written confirmation. Marcus exhaled through his nose. He did not want facts. Facts created obligations. He wanted enough ambiguity to justify a controlled exit. "Let me see everything the traveler provided," he said. Victor handed him the transparent folder. Marcus turned the pages slowly. Temporary import authorization, commercial invoice, serial number manifest, program transfer letter, chain of custody signatures. Nothing in the packet immediately justified the language Victor had used on the referral screen. "This is all?" Marcus asked. "No," Lena said. Victor looked at her. Lena pointed to Evelyn's brown leather work bag, which sat behind the station beside the gray tray. "There is a separate identification wallet in the interior locked compartment." Victor's face changed, not dramatically. The blood did not vanish from it yet. His knees did not weaken. But the muscles around his eyes contracted as though a bright light had been switched on too close to his face. Marcus looked at him. "You searched the bag?" "We secured the documents relevant to the merchandise examination." "Did she tell you there was additional identification?" "From the interview room," Evelyn answered, repeatedly. Victor's head turned toward her. "You said professional credentials were in the interior compartment." "Yes, you did not say they were relevant to the equipment." "I said they could verify my identity and employer." Victor's mouth opened, then closed. He remembered the exchange. He also remembered dismissing it. At the time, the detail had seemed almost irritatingly irrelevant. A professional title did not legalize cargo. He had been right about that narrow proposition. What he had not considered was who might hold credentials important enough to create a locked compartment inside an otherwise ordinary bag. Marcus lifted the work bag onto the counter. Combination 417, Evelyn said. Marcus entered the numbers. The zipper released with a muted click. Inside were a pair of reading glasses, a slim notebook, a sealed envelope, and a black leather credential wallet. Marcus picked it up. The leather was matte and unmarked, no gold lettering, no decorative seal. He opened it. The badge on the left side was not large, but it carried the dense authority of an object designed never to need embellishment. On the right was a federal credential bearing Evelyn's photograph. Beneath her name, in precise capital letters, appeared her title: Deputy Inspector General, United States Department of the Treasury. Below it was the Office of Inspector General identification number and a secure verification contact. Marcus stopped breathing for a moment. The silence that followed was not theatrical. No one gasped, no one dropped anything. It was quieter than that. The ventilation continued overhead. A printer cycled in an empty office. Rain tapped the distant terminal windows. Victor stared at the credential. His hands became numb. The sensation began at the fingertips and moved inward. His tongue seemed suddenly too large for his mouth. He swallowed, but the dryness in his throat remained. He could hear his heartbeat against the fabric of his collar. Not fast at first, heavy, distinct. Each beat seemed to separate one consequence from the next. Office of Inspector General, complaint history, audit logs, supervisory review, referral language, camera preservation, retaliation against a probationary employee. His eyes moved to Lena. She was watching him, not with satisfaction, but with a fear that had not yet left her body. That frightened him more. If she had looked triumphant, he could have called her emotional, disloyal, opportunistic. Instead, she looked like someone who still expected to be punished for telling the truth. Marcus read the credential again. Mrs. Hart, he said carefully, we need to verify this through the issuing office. Yes. Victor seized the sentence. Exactly. His voice cracked on the first syllable. He cleared his throat and tried again. Any credential presented during an active examination must be independently authenticated. Until that process is complete, the administrative hold remains in effect. Marcus turned toward him. Victor could see the question in his face. Do you understand what you are doing? Victor understood too well. He was no longer claiming Evelyn's identity was false. Denial had become too dangerous. Instead, he retreated into procedure, hoping procedure could be made thick enough to hide inside. We verify, Marcus said. Now. He took out his phone and dialed the secure number printed on the credential. While the call connected, 3 separate systems elsewhere had already begun to converge. At 1:36 a.m., Miriam Cole had checked her phone for the 6th time. She sat in a dark home office in Washington, still dressed in a black blazer and cobalt blouse from the evening briefing. Evelyn's arrival protocol was modest by executive security standards. A confirmation message after customs, followed by a second message when the equipment transfer was complete. The first had never arrived. Miriam had called Evelyn twice. Both calls went unanswered. She then contacted Daniel Cho, who said Evelyn had not emerged and that his verification call with customs had been cut off. Miriam did not panic. She activated the overdue traveler protocol and notified the Treasury Inspector General Duty Office. At 1:42 a.m., Lena's integrity report entered the same duty queue. At 1:47 a.m., the interagency permit system generated an exception notice. An active authorization had remained under examination beyond the expected threshold without completed manual verification. 3 signals, 3 independent sources, 1 traveler. Naomi Pierce received them all. She was the overnight duty inspector, a 45-year-old investigator known for reading procedural anomalies as if they were changes in a person's breathing. From her apartment desk, she opened the permit record, the integrity submission, and Miriam's notification side by side. When Marcus Bell's call arrived, Naomi was already looking at Victor Kane's name. Office of Inspector General Duty Desk, she said. Marcus straightened instinctively. This is Deputy Director Marcus Bell at Northbridge Customs. I'm calling to verify a credential for Evelyn Hart. Naomi did not answer immediately. Place the call on speaker and identify everyone present. Marcus did. Victor's name entered the room last. Naomi's voice remained level.
Credential number?
Marcus read it. Keys clicked faintly on Naomi's end. Credential is valid. Evelyn Margaret Hart is Deputy Inspector General for Customs Integrity and Compliance Oversight. Victor's heartbeat accelerated. The sound inside his ears became almost watery. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Naomi continued. This matter is now under Independent Preservation Authority. No document, note, recording, access log, property record, or device associated with the examination may be modified, deleted, reclassified, or removed from its current evidentiary chain. Victor opened his mouth. Naomi spoke before he could. Supervisor Kane, do not alter the working narrative or instruct any subordinate regarding the content of a statement. His lips remained parted. A drop of sweat moved from his temple toward his cheek. Naomi addressed Marcus next. Return Ms. Hart's personal phone and passport immediately, unless you can articulate a separate lawful basis to retain them. The equipment may remain secured pending formal confirmation, but all handling must be logged from this point forward. Marcus looked at Victor. Victor bent toward the gray tray. His fingers trembled visibly as he lifted the passport. The cover slipped against his numb thumb and struck the counter. A small sound. Barely anything. Yet every person nearby heard it. Victor picked it up again and carried the phone and passport into the interview room. He placed them on the table before Evelyn. His eyes did not meet hers. The documents are being returned pending further review. Evelyn looked at the passport, then at the phone. She did not reach for either immediately. Has the custody gap been documented? Victor's nostrils flared. Marcus answered from the doorway. It will be. Evelyn finally placed one hand over the passport. The change in the room was unmistakable. Marcus had become cautious. Calvin stood farther from Victor than before. Victor's voice had lost its command, all because of the credential that had been available from the beginning. Evelyn felt no triumph, only a deep, clean sadness. If I had been a private consultant, she said, would the permit be less valid? No one answered. If I had been a retired teacher carrying equipment for a university, would Officer Ortiz's verification matter less? Victor's jaw tightened. This is not the time for. It is precisely the time. Her tone remained quiet. My title does not transform your earlier decisions into errors. The valid declaration, matching serial numbers, authorized duty contact, and complete documents already did that. Victor looked at the table. Evelyn continued. You were given enough information to treat me lawfully long before you were given a reason to fear me. The words reached him, but not as moral judgment. Not yet. Victor thought of his salary, his pension, the regional command recommendation, his mortgage, his wife asking why the department had called, his children hearing his name spoken in an investigation. His fear remained entirely centered on the life he might lose. Evelyn saw that too. She turned toward the speakerphone. Inspector Pierce, I am requesting independent preservation of the complete record and separation of all witness statements. Granted, Naomi said. I am not requesting an immediate disciplinary finding. Victor looked up. For one brief, desperate second, hope entered his face. Evelyn extinguished it without cruelty. I am requesting that no person involved in the conduct control the investigation into it. Naomi's response was immediate. That is already in effect. Evelyn took her phone and passport from the table. The devices in the worn suitcase remained under review. The examination was not yet formally closed, but the story Victor had been writing no longer belonged to him. At 2:18 a.m., Northbridge Airport looked almost abandoned from the outside. Rain still struck the terminal glass, but the storm had weakened into a steady gray curtain. The departure boards continued to glow above rows of empty seats. Cleaning machines moved slowly across distant floors, their amber lights turning in patient circles. Inside the customs complex, however, the night had stopped moving forward. Naomi Pierce remained on the secure conference line from Washington. She did not arrive with a convoy of officials. She did not send senior executives racing through the storm. Instead, she did what competent oversight usually did first. She froze the record before anyone could improve it. From this point, Naomi said, through the speakerphone, all involved personnel are under a preservation directive. Her voice was measured, nearly flat, yet it altered the room more effectively than shouting would have. No working note is to be edited, no device is to be reset, no access classification is to be changed. No officer involved in the examination is to discuss the substance of the event with another witness until individual statements are completed. Victor Kane stood beside the secondary inspection counter. His uniform remained buttoned, his badge remained pinned above his heart, his radio still occupied the same place on his belt. None of those objects felt connected to authority anymore. A local internal affairs inspector was already on the way, Naomi explained, along with the overnight airport security supervisor. Their purpose was not to determine guilt before dawn. They would establish evidentiary custody, separate witnesses, and document the condition of the systems. Owen Park received the first direct instruction. Mr. Park, Naomi said, lock all relevant user accounts to read-only status except for your preservation account. Owen sat in the monitoring room with both hands resting on the keyboard. His left knee was still bouncing beneath the desk. Yes, Mom. Create forensic copies of Interview 3, secondary station cameras, corridor cameras, access logs, authorization query history, and all permission change requests associated with Supervisor Kane's account. Victor turned toward the speakerphone. That is a broad seizure of operational data. Naomi did not answer him immediately. The records are not being seized from the agency, she said. They are being preserved under administrative investigative authority. We have unrelated travelers on those feeds. Then the copies will be handled under restricted evidentiary access. Privacy is not a basis for allowing relevant data to remain alterable. Victor's mouth drew sideways in a faint, involuntary sneer. It vanished as soon as he realized Marcus had seen it. Owen began the preservation process. One by one, account controls changed on the system. Victor watched the small status panel near the station. V. Kane. Access suspended pending review. The words appeared without ceremony. His hand moved instinctively toward his badge, then stopped halfway. For 20 years, Victor had understood the world through permissions. Doors opened when his credential touched the reader. People moved when he pointed. Subordinates revised language when he objected. Now the system recognized his name but no longer accepted his commands. The first two officials arrived at 2:31 a.m. The internal affairs inspector was a compact man named Julian Mercer, 48, with thinning gray hair and a face so calm it seemed almost absent of judgment. He carried no dramatic badge on display, only a government identification wallet and a hard-sided evidence case. Beside him walked Priya Nand, the overnight airport security supervisor. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a charcoal uniform jacket over a white shirt. Her dark hair was braided close to the back of her head, and the directness of her gaze suggested she had spent years entering rooms where people hoped her authority would remain unclear. Julian introduced himself to each person separately. Then he assigned rooms. Victor was sent to Interview 2. Marcus Bell went to a conference office across the corridor. Calvin Rourke was placed in a records room with no terminal access. Lena Ortiz remained near the system station under Priya's supervision until her original notes were exported. No communication among witnesses, Julian said. That includes text messages, calls, gestures through windows, and messages passed through uninvolved staff. Calvin gave a nervous half-law. You make it sound like a criminal scene. Julian looked at him. It is an administrative integrity scene. The distinction is meaningful. The preservation requirements are not optional. The laugh died. Victor entered Interview 2 alone. A blank statement form waited on the table. At the top were 3 instructions. Describe events in chronological order. Distinguish direct observation from assumption. Do not omit facts believed to be unfavorable. Victor sat down. For several minutes he did not write. The room was nearly identical to the one where Evelyn had been held, Yet it felt smaller now that he occupied the chair without control over the door. The camera above him remained lit. His first instinct was still blame. Evelyn could have disclosed her title. The sentence arrived fully formed. He wrote, "The traveler did not initially disclose the significance of her federal position." Victor stopped. The instruction on the form stared back at him. Direct observation from assumption. Evelyn had said she worked in federal compliance oversight. She had told him professional credentials were in the locked compartment. She had asked him to inspect them. He crossed out the sentence. The pen shook slightly between his fingers. He began again. At approximately 0:12, I observed electronic components during screening and directed the traveler to secondary inspection. That part was defensible. The initial referral had been reasonable. Victor felt a brief easing in his chest. He continued. The traveler produced documents purporting to authorize temporary importation. Purporting. He looked at the word. It was language officers used before authentication. It created distance. It sounded cautious, but the agency code had validated. The serial numbers had matched. Daniel had confirmed the equipment. Victor left the word in place. Then came the duty number. He remembered Lena's hand moving toward the telephone icon. He remembered saying no before giving a reason. His stomach contracted. Victor wrote that he had delayed external contact pending further examination of the physical devices. That was true. It was also incomplete. The blank page seemed to demand what the working reports had never demanded. Not merely what he had done, but why. He pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum. His heartbeat felt irregular, though he knew it was probably only adrenaline. In another room, Marcus Bell had already begun constructing a safer account. He wrote that Victor had presented the matter as an unresolved authentication concern. He wrote that he had authorized continued inspection in reliance on Victor's experience and representations. He did not initially mention the performance conversation before the examination. Julian entered 10 minutes later. Read the first page and asked one question. Did you discuss unit findings or Victor Kane's promotion prospects with him before this traveler was selected? Marcus's pen stopped. His glasses slipped down the bridge of his nose. That was a routine performance discussion. That was not my question. Marcus's lips, yes, include it. Marcus looked toward the door. This could be read as pressure to produce enforcement activity. It will be read in context. The agency's reputation is not part of your factual statement. Marcus removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. What happened here appears to be a serious operational failure. We should not turn one officer's judgment error into an indictment of the entire unit. Julian closed the folio. No one has asked you for a public relations classification. Later, Marcus repeated the argument directly to Naomi through the secure line. We can acknowledge this as a serious procedural incident, he said. Expanded review before preliminary findings risks damaging public confidence and staff morale. Naomi's reply remained calm. Public confidence is not protected by narrowing the scope before the facts are known. This may be one supervisor overcommitting to a bad theory. There are already indications of reporting pressure, supervisory omission, access control interference, and prior record edits by another officer. Marcus looked toward Calvin's closed room. You are assuming a pattern. I am ordering a review to determine whether one exists. That review could implicate dozens of unrelated cases. Yes. The simplicity of the answer left Marcus with nowhere to move. In the records room, Calvin Rourke wrote quickly. His first statement described himself as a secondary observer with no decision-making role. He claimed he had offered general examples from prior experience, but had not directed the examination. When Julian compared that claim with the system audit, a different picture appeared. Calvin's account had accessed Victor's working file 6 times. His login had opened the narrative field after Lena's original notes were entered. More troubling, the audit history linked Calvin to edits in 4 previous extended examinations supervised by Victor. Phrases had been changed. Requested clarification became challenged instructions. Appeared confused became provided inconsistent account. Voluntarily disclosed, disappeared entirely. None of those edits alone proved misconduct. Together, they demanded explanation. When Julian placed the access report on the table, Calvin's face lost color. I was formatting reports. You changed factual characterizations. I used standardized language. On whose instruction? Calvin looked toward the wall as if Victor might be visible through it. I followed supervisory practice. That is not the same as answering the question. Calvin's lower lip trembled. He had spent years attaching himself to authority. Now authority was distributed among people who did not need his loyalty. I didn't make the detention decisions, he said. No one asked whether you did. I was trying to keep the documentation consistent. With events or with Supervisor Kane's account. Calvin's mouth opened. No answer came. At the systems desk, evidence accumulated without emotion. The kiosk record showed Evelyn had declared professional equipment before screening. The scanner archive showed the devices arranged openly in protective foam. The permit system confirmed an active interagency authorization and recorded the exact minute the duty number appeared on Lena's screen. The telephone log showed Lena's outgoing call and Victor's physical termination of the line. The camera footage showed Evelyn surrendering her passport, phone, and documents. No receipt was printed. Lena's original time-stamped notes differed sharply from the language Victor later requested. Owen's audit entry preserved the oral instruction to restrict camera access without written approval. Harold Finch's video call contained Victor's voice, distant but intelligible. I knew there was something wrong the moment I saw that suitcase. The statement had been made before Victor opened Evelyn's document folder. Finally, the recorded call between Victor and Marcus revealed what Victor had omitted: the valid agency code, the matching serial numbers, the system-generated duty number, Evelyn's voluntary declaration. The evidence did not arrive as a dramatic revelation. It arrived in folders, timestamps, audio files, user histories. Each item was small. Together, they removed Victor's remaining shelter. Priya Nand entered interview 2 at 3:44 a.m. to collect Victor's written statement. He had completed less than 2 pages. "You need more time," she asked. Victor looked at the clock. He had been sitting for nearly an hour. It felt like 10 minutes and an entire year. "I need access to the reports. You are to write from memory before reviewing preserved evidence. That prevents accuracy. It prevents coordination." Victor leaned back. The chair creaked beneath his weight. "My actions are being interpreted through hindsight. At the time, I had an unresolved technology concern and a traveler who was unusually controlled." Priya's brow shifted slightly. Unusually controlled. Professional couriers are trained not to show stress. Was that based on specific intelligence? It was based on experience. Did experience instruct you not to call the verification number? Victor's jaw clenched. "You're conducting an interview." I asked one clarifying question. He looked away. His anger moved from person to person because it could not yet turn inward. Evelyn had concealed her importance. Lena had undermined command. Owen had protected himself with logs. Harold had inserted himself into official work. Marcus had allowed the problem to reach Naomi. Calvin would say anything now. Victor listed them mentally as though identifying responsible parties in a case. Then the list failed. None of them had made him ignore the number. None had made him disconnect Daniel. None had made him tell Marcus only the facts that supported continued restraint. None had made him threaten Lena's review. The realization did not arrive as remorse. It arrived as isolation. For the first time, Victor understood that there might be no one left inside the story with him. At 4:09 a.m., Naomi joined the local officials by video. Her face appeared on the conference room screen, framed by a dark bob and the severe lines of a charcoal blazer. She reviewed the preliminary preservation summary without visible emotion. Marcus sat at one end of the table. Victor sat at the other. Calvin and Lena were kept in separate rooms and did not attend. Evelyn had completed her statement in a private waiting area and was free to leave. She had chosen to remain, until Naomi confirmed that Lena and Harold were formally recorded as witnesses rather than potential subjects of disciplinary action. Naomi looked first at Marcus. Your request to classify this as a contained operational incident is denied. Marcus's shoulders lowered. The review will include prior complaints involving Supervisor Kane, all report edits connected to Officer Rourke's account, and supervisory closures approved under your authority. Marcus's face hardened. That scope is disproportionate before findings. The existing evidence establishes sufficient predicate for pattern review. Then Naomi turned to Victor. Pending investigation, you are placed on administrative suspension from enforcement duties. Victor's fingers closed around the edge of the table. This is before I have been interviewed by counsel. This is not a disciplinary finding. It is a risk control measure. My access has already been disabled. It will remain disabled. My badge? You will surrender your operational credential and restricted area access card to Inspector Mercer. Your employment status and pay classification will be addressed under applicable personnel rules. Victor's lips parted. The room seemed to tilt by less than a degree. Not enough to make him fall. Enough to make him place both feet more firmly on the floor. Marcus looked down at his hands. Calvin was not there to nod. No subordinate stood behind Victor's shoulder. The silver nameplate still read V. Kane, but it no longer commanded the room. Victor removed the access card from his belt. The plastic caught against the clip because his fingers were trembling. He tried again. On the third attempt, it came free. He placed it on the table. The sound was almost weightless. Evelyn sat alone in the waiting room when Priya came to tell her the suspension had been issued. The worst of the immediate pressure had passed. Her body responded by releasing everything it had postponed. Her hands began to shake. Not the brief tremor she had suppressed beside the suitcase. A deeper movement traveled through both forearms, making the paper cup of water rattle between her palms. Evelyn set it down before she spilled it. She pressed her hands against her knees. The room was quiet except for the rain and the vending machine compressor. She thought of Lena staring at her unsaved report. Harold gripping his phone while Victor demanded deletion. Owen preserving a record because rules mattered even when courage felt too expensive. Evelyn had stayed silent about her title because she wanted the facts to reveal how Victor treated an ordinary traveler. Now she wondered whether that choice had required too much from other people. Had Lena risked her career because Evelyn wanted a cleaner record? Had Harold remained exposed because Evelyn refused to end the encounter? The questions hurt because they did not have simple answers. Evelyn could have stopped Victor sooner. She also knew his misuse of authority had begun before the first meaningful opportunity to reveal herself. The false note existed, the property gap existed, the interrupted verification existed, the threat to Lena existed. Victor had been offered exits repeatedly. He had closed each one himself. When Naomi called her privately, Evelyn's voice had steadied again. "Do you want immediate removal proceedings initiated?" Naomi asked. "No." Naomi studied her through the screen. "That is not the same as declining investigation. I am not declining anything. I want the evidence reviewed under the applicable standards. And the scope? Not just Kane. Marcus's name did not need emphasis. Review the supervisory closures. Review Rourke's edits. Review retaliation exposure for Ortiz. Review whether prior complainants were denied independent camera review." Naomi nodded once. "You believe this is systemic. I believe treating Kane as the only problem would be convenient." Evelyn looked through the waiting room glass toward the dark corridor. Convenience is how systems preserve themselves. At 4:37 a.m., Julian escorted Victor from the conference room. Victor was not handcuffed. No one raised a voice. He still wore the uniform. But his access card was gone, his system permissions were gone, and his badge no longer granted him a role in what happened next. As he passed the waiting room, he saw Evelyn through the glass. She was seated alone, her old suitcase beside her and both hands wrapped around a paper cup. For a moment, Victor expected triumph in her face. There was none. She looked exhausted. that disturbed him more than anger would have. Anger might have allowed him to imagine this as personal revenge. Her exhaustion suggested something worse, that he had become one more case in a pattern she already understood. Victor kept walking. Behind him, the investigation continued without his permission. The investigation lasted 9 months. There was no single morning when the truth arrived complete. It emerged through old complaint files, archived video, personnel evaluations, system logs, and interviews with people who had once believed their experiences were too small to matter. Some complaints against Victor Kane could not be substantiated. One traveler remembered being held for almost 3 hours but could not provide the date. Another believed Victor had deliberately humiliated him, yet the surviving recording contained no clear violation. A third complaint rested on conflicting accounts and a camera angle that showed bodies moving without capturing speech. Naomi Pierce refused to treat uncertainty as proof. She also refused to treat uncertainty as innocence. Investigators compared the complaints instead of dismissing them one by one. A pattern began to appear. Not dramatic enough to have forced attention earlier, but consistent enough to become unmistakable once someone finally looked across the years, rather than at each file in isolation. Victor's extended examinations disproportionately involved travelers who spoke limited English, appeared unfamiliar with border procedures, carried inexpensive luggage, or lacked the confidence to challenge an officer's wording. His reports repeatedly described such travelers as evasive, argumentative, or inconsistent. The camera footage often showed something quieter: confusion, repeated requests for explanation, people nodding because they did not fully understand, people apologizing before anyone had told them what they had done wrong. In several cases, Victor's suspicion had been reasonable at the beginning. The misconduct appeared later, after evidence weakened the theory and retreat would have required him to acknowledge error. That distinction became central to the final report. The problem was not that Victor had exercised authority. The problem was that he had treated authority as permission to protect his own conclusions from contradiction. Marcus Bell's supervisory record proved more damaging than he expected. He had closed 7 complaints against Victor using variations of the same phrase, insufficient evidence of policy deviation. Yet in 4 of those cases, Marcus had not requested independent witness statements. In 3, he had accepted Victor's written account without reviewing the full video archive. In 2, the camera footage had been automatically deleted after the retention period expired because no preservation request had been filed. Marcus had not fabricated evidence. He had made sure he never had to look too closely at it. When Naomi questioned him in the final management interview, Marcus sat in a gray conference room with his hands folded over an unopened notebook. His glasses kept sliding down his nose. "I was managing hundreds of operational incidents," he said. "You are applying investigative resources retrospectively that were not available at the time. Camera review was available," Naomi replied. "Not every complaint warrants a full evidentiary process. Who decided which ones did?" "I did." "Based on what criteria?" Marcus's fingers tightened against one another. "Credibility, specificity, operational context, and Victor Kane's performance record." Marcus hesitated. It was relevant. His record, as documented by whom? The question left him silent. Victor's record had been reinforced by the very reports now under scrutiny. Calvin Rourke's role was less visible but more deliberate. The audit history showed that Calvin had edited factual descriptions in at least 6 examinations supervised by Victor. He had rarely invented events. Instead, he altered their emotional meaning. Asked whether she could contact family, became attempted to interrupt the examination. Did not appear to understand the question, became failed to provide a coherent answer. Requested clarification regarding detention status, became challenged lawful authority. When confronted, Calvin insisted that he had standardized informal notes into professional language. The investigators asked why the standardized language always made the traveler appear less cooperative. Calvin's face tightened into the small, defensive smile he once used when standing beside Victor. This time, there was no superior nearby to mirror it. I was following the unit's reporting conventions. Who created those conventions? Calvin looked toward his attorney. I don't know. The answer preserved him from admitting intent. It did not preserve his position. Lena Ortiz testified twice. During the first interview, she described Victor's instructions, the interrupted call with Daniel Cho, and the pressure to revise her notes. During the second, she asked to add something that had been troubling her. She had not objected immediately. She had watched Victor hold Evelyn's documents without generating a receipt. She had left the interview room after he invoked her performance review. She had allowed fear to delay her resistance. I don't want the report to make me look braver than I was, Lena said. Her hands rested tightly together in her lap. I knew parts of it were wrong before I said anything. I kept hoping someone above me would fix it so I wouldn't have to choose. Naomi studied her across the table. Why did you eventually report it? Lena looked down at her fingers. Because he started changing the record. Once the report said something different from what happened, everyone afterward would be deciding based on a lie. Lena was not promoted as a reward. She was transferred to another operational unit, protected under the agency's anti-retaliation procedures, and allowed to complete her probation under a supervisor, with no connection to Marcus or Victor. The final review noted both her initial compliance and her later refusal. That mattered to Evelyn. Institutional courage, she believed, should not require pretending fear had never existed. Owen Park was cleared of wrongdoing. His decision to transfer the camera stream to a secure server while preserving retention and documenting Victor's oral instruction was found consistent with technical policy. The review recommended that future access restrictions require automated secondary approval, removing the burden from individual technicians asked to resist a supervisor in real time. Harold Finch provided the original video call file and consented to forensic examination of its metadata. His recording was imperfect. Victor's voice sounded distant beneath airport announcements and rainfall against the terminal glass. But the sentence remained audible. I knew there was something wrong the moment I saw that suitcase. The timestamp placed it before Victor had reviewed Evelyn's authorization packet. It did not prove every later decision was discriminatory. It proved the conclusion had begun forming before the evidence. Victor's disciplinary hearing took place in the same federal complex where he had once attended promotion interviews. He no longer wore the Navy uniform. He appeared in a dark civilian suit that fit poorly across the shoulders, as though his body still expected the structure of the duty belt beneath it. His hair had grown slightly longer around the ears. Gray showed more clearly at the temples. Months of uncertainty had changed the way he occupied a room. He sat with his elbows close to his sides, conserving space instead of claiming it. The agency charged him administratively with failure to follow verification procedures, inaccurate reporting, misuse of supervisory authority, improper handling of identity documents, interference with an internal record, and retaliation-related conduct toward a probationary employee. His attorney challenged several findings. Some were narrowed, others remained. The panel did not decide whether Victor had committed a criminal offense. That question required a different standard, a separate prosecutor, and proof of intent beyond what administrative proceedings demanded. The panel decided whether he could still be trusted with the authority to detain travelers, direct subordinates, and create official records affecting individual liberty. The answer was no. Victor's employment was terminated. The investigative file was referred to federal prosecutors for review of possible false statement and evidence interference violations. No indictment was promised. No sentence was announced. A civil action filed by Evelyn and later joined by 2 former travelers moved on a separate track. Victor's final personnel record made him effectively ineligible for future positions involving detention authority or public safety enforcement. Marcus was demoted for supervisory failure. He remained in the agency for 4 months in a non-management role, then resigned before the next performance cycle. Calvin was suspended and placed under a separate disciplinary process concerning report alterations. Without Victor's protection or Marcus's preference for quiet resolutions, Calvin discovered how little institutional loyalty survived once it became inconvenient. Near the end of the hearing, Victor asked to address Evelyn directly. She sat across the room beside Naomi, wearing a charcoal suit rather than the gray travel coat. The old Navy suitcase was not with her. Victor's hands were clasped so tightly that the knuckles had gone pale. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked. His voice contained no command now. "Tell you what?" Evelyn said. "Who you were. I told you my name. You know what I mean. I gave you my passport. I told you where my professional credentials were. I gave you the permit, the receiving contact, the duty number, the serial list, and the chain of custody record. You said you worked in compliance. I did." Victor's mouth twitched. "You let me continue." Evelyn held his gaze. "No, Mr. Kane." "You continued." His shoulders stiffened. "You knew what would happen once that credential came out. I knew your behavior might change, and you wanted to see it. I hoped it would not need to." Victor leaned forward. "If you had shown me the card at the beginning, none of this would have happened." Evelyn's expression did not harden. That made her answer heavier. The permit would not have become more valid. Officer Ortiz's verification would not have become more accurate. Mr. Cho's confirmation would not have become more credible. She paused. "And pressuring a subordinate to alter a record would not have become wrong only after you learned my title." Victor looked away. Evelyn continued quietly. "The most troubling fact is not that you detained a senior official." His eyes returned to her. "It is that you had done versions of the same thing to people who had no credential capable of frightening you." Something shifted in Victor's face. Not repentance. Recognition. For months he had told himself that one unlucky encounter had destroyed his career. He had imagined that Evelyn's hidden authority was the trap, and that every consequence had flowed from her choice not to announce it sooner. Then the former travelers testified. A restaurant worker who had agreed with accusations he did not understand because he feared missing his connecting flight. A widowed grandmother whose medication had been separated from her during a prolonged inspection. A university student who had apologized repeatedly while Victor described his confusion as deception. Evelyn had not been the first. She had only been the first person whose mistreatment forced the institution to preserve the record. Victor's chin trembled once before he tightened his jaw. He looked down at his hands. For years, he had used other people's uncertainty as proof of his instincts. Their fear had made him feel perceptive. Their obedience had made him feel necessary. Now the uniform was gone, and the fear belonged to him. His career had not been destroyed by a conspiracy, a vindictive official, or one impossible decision. It had been dismantled by moments in which he could have stopped. The first phone call, the matching numbers, Lena's warning, Daniel's confirmation, the property receipt, the camera policy, each exit had been visible. He had closed them because walking backward felt more humiliating than moving deeper into error. A year after the night of the storm, Evelyn returned to Northbridge. This time, the weather was clear. Morning sunlight entered through the terminal windows, spreading warm rectangles across the polished floor. The airport was crowded with families, business travelers, and students returning from winter break. Evelyn wore the same gray trench coat. She pulled the same faded navy suitcase behind her. The handle still pinched her palm. She had considered replacing it after the investigation ended. Instead, she had taken it to a repair shop where a patient craftsman reinforced the peeling leather without making it look new. At customs, a young officer examined the scanner image and raised one hand. "Mom, I need to take a closer look at one item in the side compartment." The officer explained that the object's internal density did not match its declared category. He asked permission to move the suitcase to a secondary table, then printed an electronic property acknowledgement before taking temporary custody of her passport and device. The receipt listed the exact time, The officer opened the bag in Evelyn's presence. Inside was a compact signal calibrator used for a later training session. He checked the permit, found the restricted view notice, and immediately called the listed duty contact. While they waited, he explained the reason for the delay. "I'm sorry this is taking a few extra minutes," he said. "The local system can confirm the permit exists, but not the equipment details." "That is what the duty contact is for," Evelyn replied. He smiled faintly. "Yes, Mom. The verification took 4 minutes." The officer returned every item, asked Evelyn to compare the receipt against the property in front of him, and closed the examination record before releasing her. He never asked what position she held. He never saw the credential wallet inside her work bag. When the gate opened, Evelyn rolled the old suitcase into the arrivals hall. No one recognized her. There was no apology from the institution, no ceremony, and no visible sign that a scandal had changed anything. Only a correctly completed receipt. A phone call made when it should have been made. A young officer explaining the limits of his authority to a traveler he believed was ordinary. Evelyn passed through the doors with no sense of victory. What she felt was quieter. Relief. A system had not become just because one arrogant man had been removed. No policy could eliminate pride, fear, or the human desire to protect oneself from embarrassment. But the reforms did certain choices harder to hide. Property receipts were now generated automatically. Every narrative edit retained the original text and the identity of the editor. Repeated complaints triggered independent review. Employees who contacted the integrity line received immediate preservation protection. Supervisors were evaluated not only on enforcement findings, but on accuracy, procedural compliance, and complaint handling. The rules could not make people good. They could prevent one person's certainty from becoming the only version of reality. Evelyn reached the public concourse and stopped near the windows. For a moment, she rested one hand on the worn suitcase. She thought of Thomas carrying it through a snowstorm in Montreal, laughing because one wheel refused to turn. Then she continued toward the exit. The lesson of Northbridge was not that officers should fear ordinary-looking travelers because one of them might secretly hold power. The lesson was that no traveler should need hidden power at all. Power does not reveal character when everyone is watching. It reveals character when the person before us seems unable to fight back. Victor's downfall began not with one terrible act, but with a series of small choices to protect his pride instead of the truth. Lena, Owen, Harold, and Evelyn chose differently. Each protected one honest detail, and together those choices became stronger than authority misused. In everyday life, we may never stand inside a customs office, but we all face moments when silence is easier, admitting a mistake feels humiliating, or someone with less influence depends on our fairness. In those moments, integrity is not dramatic. It is simply choosing what is right before we know who is watching. May you be given the courage to tell the truth gently, the humility to correct yourself quickly, and the wisdom to treat every person with dignity. Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, conscience, and the quiet choices that change lives.